who's also attending, and may throw in a few comments as well. So the intent was basically to share the experience I had with teaching internationally, they are diverse probably as the situations related to culture and teaching overall. I want to set some context first because I always have this sort of thought that we as instructors are trying to teach something and show certain things to students, but we never know what do they actually see. So on this slide, you could see the image of a mother feeding a son, and probably you cannot read the the caption there, but it says Jackson Pollock's mother. If you know, Jackson Pollock was famous abstract painter. So maybe that's what inspired the painter, the pattern on his mother clothing, not exactly the food she was cooking. So I'm concerned with this, but the other thing is that in engineering, where I come from, we also have a debate about what to teach students, and it's perhaps different than in humanities or sciences, but strongly for a number of years now, the concern is that we are teaching only the technical side of things to students who eventually will start as on the technical level, but then will go forward professionally, become managers, CEOs, and so forth, and they may be lacking in some of these skills that we did not teach them. The debate is sort of captured in this slide that explains that basically we should not limit ourselves, I'm guessing that applies to all disciplines, only to the core content knowledge that's related to that discipline. But we also have to help students build the connections with other things, the human interaction and humanistic knowledge, and also all kinds of creation of new knowledge as well, the skills that are essential to move forward. So in my course that I want to talk about in a moment, we are sort of referring to some of these concepts that are trying to go outside a little bit of engineering. The other thing about engineering is if you look closely on that particular slide, it shows a survey from 25 some years ago, and curiously it was repeated with almost exact results 20 years later, and shows what alumni think about what's important in their jobs. And I pointed out these 4 areas: teamwork, communication, ethics, and creative thinking. Why is this important? Because that's what the leaders always are expected to do. But in engineering, we over-prepare students on technical content, but under-prepare on these 4 or maybe more even types of skills. So in that course that I teach, basically we are trying to merge 3 disciplines that are semi-technical: product development, manufacturing, and business. I will not tell you much more about the course itself, but I would like to share with you some thoughts about the approach and concerns that I normally have. In the course, the content is sort of positioned globally because today everything is global. I give students these exercises to tell me how they view their global life, to report what kind of things they eat, wear, and use. And they are surprised to find that almost everything is from somewhere else. So we throw at them these groups of concepts related to what engineers do in real life. And obviously, not everybody absorbs the same amount. Sometimes what you get from that pile of information is something like this, or maybe something like that. And that's fine. Basically, there is ambiguity in everything we teach. So this is not a minimum set. It's maybe a set from which you can pick bits and pieces. When things moved online last year, the biggest issue I had was, and I still have, was that students disappeared. We were staring at screens, probably from both ends, and I didn't see them. And I didn't know who they are, if they even were there. So I started to give them assignments because I wanted to know who they are. And these assignments are trivial, especially that each of the students has a smartphone and they can shoot a video in no time. And I asked them to answer 5 questions, or especially like in Poland, I gave them also a question about their English skills. And they recorded, and I could watch them in real time. I wish I could share those with you, and you would see that they are useful. And at the end of the course, which just finished yesterday, I also asked them to record the second video, where they would sort of return to what they said in the first one and basically reflect on the experience. So even though I had to watch 100 videos like that, they are quite interesting because they tell a lot about students. When I was teaching the course face-to-face, I did this in Windsor, in Poland, and also once I did travel to Saudi Arabia. And we usually started with the team building exercises. So one of the commonly used, at least in engineering, but also elsewhere, is something what's called the spaghetti tower or a marshmallow challenge. Students get a bag of supplies that you see here, and then they have to build the tallest tower with the marshmallow on top. Little did I know that not everything here is safe, because if you could guess which of these items that you see is culturally dangerous. I cannot hear what you say. You can put something on the chat channel, but I'll give you the the answer, and that's a marshmallow, the thing that goes on top, because marshmallow contains gelatin, and gelatin is an animal product. We don't pay much attention, perhaps in Canada or other places, but in other places they are very particular whether this is a product that comes from pigs or cows or something else. So a former student of mine who helped me organize that workshop in Saudi Arabia, fortunately was quick thinking and found a product that was suitable for that setting. But then I'm bringing this up because basically all students everywhere are equally engaged. And unfortunately, going online, we lost that opportunity for the engagement. So I had to switch to communications exercises and another one where students would need to hypothesize, if I give them a picture like this, what it does represent. And this is a picture from New York Times actually, and then you can see the description or the answers from the students. So all these exercises are usually helping in the long run students to tell about their own work to the people who are not engineers. And I think that's extremely important because in the end, the lay people have to understand and appreciate work of the engineers do. So this is another exercise. Students are getting supplies, a piece of aluminum foil like you use in the kitchen, and they have to build a hat out of it, except it's a teamwork. So they have to build a set of hats that somehow connect, and they have to explain what the story behind this is. So this was pre-pandemic, obviously. In last year, I was teaching also in Poland, so here are the students who made up their creations in separation, but nevertheless, they also succeeded. Another exercise, and I think I'm running kind of low on time, but is that what I need to say that engineers usually are bored by lecturing. So you have to give them something to do to get them engaged. So the easiest things are things like paper planes or even this aluminum foil. So in this exercise, they, oops, I don't know what happened. Did you cut me off or what? I lost my presentation.
No, it wasn't me. Perhaps you stopped sharing by mistake, possibly, but you do have 2 more minutes to go.
Okay, but I don't see my...
So back to the arrow at the top.
I don't have it anymore, so I lost control. Sorry
Lost
about
control,
that.
but I haven't done anything, but it's
No, I don't
okay.
know.
You can tell us.
That's all right.
We're almost done.
So anyway, so I cannot. Oh, okay, let me see. Maybe I can bring it back.
Doing that, it's never cool. You're a good storyteller, so I think you should just talk. Yeah.
All right, I think it needs to load up again.
Yeah, I mean, technical challenges are all too common.
I wasn't touching anything, so.
No, it's just not working right now. Do you want to get that?
Would you like to wrap up?
Okay. That was my...
That's your warning.
Let me see if I can just finish this one. All right, so... Sorry. So on this slide, you see something I found in a Lufthansa magazine when I was flying, a story about Jim Collins, who's on the picture here, who is a master designer of paper airplanes and won a world championship years ago with this plane. And students got these instructions, and their job was to build these planes according to the instructions. So then in face-to-face teaching, we were basically trying these planes in our big classroom. But then when we went online, each student could still work and do something themselves. And they reported their common results, so they communicated. And so this was a major challenge. So in closing, because I'm out of time, we may come back to this. I have one more thing here about cultural sort of issues, but I'll stop just for the sake of other presenters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to our question and answer period after the next presentation or the third presentation. And yes, you'll be able to share that slide with us. So let's move on now to Shami and Shenzi. Are you there?
Yes, we are.
Great. I'll let you introduce yourselves and share your screens, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.
So, good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for joining us. So navigating through uncertain times such as the one we inhabit has resulted us to wonder the future of higher education. Within the Canadian context, higher education remains a power engine that fuels the economy. This is mainly attributed to the proliferation in student mobility, which has translated to 600,000 international students, IS, over the past 2 decades, contributing to Canada's gross domestic product, GDP, by 26.1 billion. Prior to COVID-19 pandemic, quarantine, and national security measures, racialized IS have been vulnerable constituents within higher education. However, little is known about their experience during this dire circumstance, nor the implication of their identities as racialized and foreign others. My colleague and I would like to preface the discussion that this is an ongoing investigation. Preliminary rounds of data collections are scheduled to be conducted within the coming months. This presentation will outline the scope of the study, followed by hypothetical findings we speculate to manifest based on literature review. Upon examining the plethora of literature that focused on racialized IS experiences, we've noted the apparent gap. That is, how COVID-19 pandemic conditioned and changed racialized IS experiences in Ontario while simultaneously examining policies and support programs that are established or the lack thereof to mitigate the ramifications during IS remote instruction. In turn, how has this impacted their academic outcome and success? Change slide, please. Thank you. The theoretical framework that were employed to understand racialized IS experiences included student development theories. Using student development theories coined by seminal scholars such as Austin, Tinto, and Chickering, we can tease out how IS as a consumer of higher education feel involved, engaged, and integrated within their university ethos. Tandemly, we use institutional theory to identify the barriers IS face.
Yes, our theoretical framework also draws on Sarah Ahmed's concept of institutional non-performativity to expose the gap between what organizations say they do and what they actually do. Although institutions use language of anti-racism and diversity, they often fail to commit to real changes. In higher education, diversity talk is used for marketing and image managing, and anti-racism and diversity then become a speech act that is not performed and reproduces institutional racism, which solidifies into obstacles and feels like banging your head against the brick wall, to quote from Ahmed, for the marginalized groups.
This case study also takes on a social phenomenological approach and explores educational practice within a social context while relying on student voices as a site of epistemology. This case study is inherently unique as it employs current historical, social, and political events to contextualize racialized IX experiences, thus interdisciplinary. Through a rigorous purposeful sampling procedure and a foundational trilogy, this case study inquires into the underlying conditions that might contribute to theoretical framing and the evolution of the study. Change slide, please. Thank you. Through our substantive, thorough, and sophisticated literature review, we have identified major recurring themes. One of them being xenophobia that manifests on, off, campus, including virtual learning spaces. Racialized IS, particularly those of East Asian origin, have been increasingly perceived to be hosting the COVID-19 pandemic. Consequently, they've been subjected to discrimination and harassment due to the intersection of their race and nationality they embody. Given the influx of xenophobic encounters, East Asian international students, this has already started to jeopardize the enrollment rates of them in the U.S. higher education institution that generates a revenue of $15 billion. Images that circulate in media further reinforce the dangerous, unpredictable, and unwelcoming pictures of the USA during this precarious time. Anti-foreign rhetoric espoused by political leaders potentially can undermine the revenue of USA higher education. Change slide, please. The sudden implementation of state lockdown, quarantine, and isolation measures brought upon an abrupt halt to various sectors within the labor force. This subsequently meant a stop in income for IS who depend on part-time employment to sustain their livelihood. The job loss resulted in the lack of housing, shelter, starvation, and debts. For those students who were unable to leave the country and were ordered by state law to depart, they found themselves in a serious predicament and unsure of what to do. In Ontario specifically, the 14-day hotel quarantine measure policy led IS to be confronted with expensive hotel bills on top of the high tuition they are required to pay.
Yeah, so as campuses shut down globally, higher education enters a new situation of emergency remote learning, which poses challenges to students who have limited access to computers and internet connections. Also, with libraries and other academic resources no longer easily available to students, IS confront heavier workload and more stress. Further, online classes tend not to provide interactive and collaborative learning that are key to effective educational programs. Often, instructors do not have the time or skills to design online courses to facilitate that kind of engagement. Although several studies found that IS are more satisfied with online courses than domestic students, it's also been argued that IS tend to rely on themselves and are reluctant to seek help. Therefore, it is urgent to establish feedback and support systems to help IS voice their needs and be involved in improving online learning. Another large body of literature focused on IS well-being and identified that they are disproportionately negatively affected by physical and psychological isolation during COVID. IS experience a loss of mobility due to travel restrictions and changes in immigration regulations that prevent them from going home or abroad. And IS who are already abroad struggle with difficulties in obtaining health information and services, managing visa status, coping with online learning without support, and maintaining human contact to mitigate loneliness. Adding to these are racism and xenophobia, financial difficulties, and absence of the social supports. As a result, IS experience depression, anxiety, shame, and fear. Studies suggest that these negative feelings are closely related to and compounded by social positions such as being female, older, non-heterosexual, and in lower socioeconomic status. As we know, the state and university play significant roles in IS well-being and academic development, especially during the pandemic. To better interrogate institutional practices and inform policymaking, we reviewed research done in North America, Australia, Europe, and Asia regarding state and institutional policies that affect IS. So we found that most governments excluded IS from their relief measures and failed to offer sufficient support. Several governments urged IS to leave while it's implementing travel restrictions. Immigration policies are tightened, visa services suspended or slowed down, making it hard for IS to manage their status. Some governments also cut funds to higher education and or lower tuition for domestic students, which leave universities more reliant on revenue brought by IS. As Shami mentioned before, in some cases, governments or political leaders played a blame game against Chinese and foreigners, greatly instigating xenophobia and discrimination aiming at international students. While universities want to attract and retain IS, negligence is prevalent in their policies and practices. Institutions seldomly take racism, housing and food insecurity, mental health, and academic and community engagement for international students into consideration, and consistently fail to offer financial, material, psychological, or academic support. An examination of 160 universities and colleges enrolling the highest numbers of IS in the US found that 26% of the institutions did not even provide COVID-related contents on their websites. Only 10% of the institutional leaders issued official letters to support their international students during the pandemic. Notably, most of the institutions mentioned above actively advertised their diversity and their services and support for IS. This fits perfectly into Ahmed's notion of the non-performativity of the institutional diversity discourse we talked about before.
Thanks, Chenzi. So the study will actively involve and interact with IS academics and higher education institutions. It aims at forging strong and lasting connection with research participants and those who work in higher education and policies at multiple levels, including faculty, staff, administrators, and higher education policy actors. Our underlying motive is to inform higher education administrators and state stakeholders who articulate and implement policies in their ivory towers but fail to understand the implications of their policies and how it unfolds at the ground level. Framing the discussion in a neoliberal and human capital rhetoric, we aim and we hope to push this discourse on supporting racialized IS during this uncertain time, whether that be through relief packages or culturally responsive student services. So thank you for showing interest in our presentation. Please contact us should you have any questions regarding the scope or the development of our research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. On time. Great. We will be talking to you about our questions. So it's very exciting. Let's see if our third speaker is here or if we're going to be starting our next session directly. So do we have somebody from Australia here? From what I see, we don't. But if we do, please speak up. We don't. So we're ready to start our questions in our discussion. Did somebody want to ask something first or type it in the chat if you're shy, or open your mic and let's get started. I have a question in the meantime for Shami and Chenzi. So what about the technical part of your study? You will be talking to international students, you will be doing focus groups or surveys, and how do you think their status as an international student will be affecting your study and their willing to participate, their willingness to participate in the first place?
Do you want to take?
You can go ahead and I'll jump in.
Yeah, so the main approach we are considering is individual interviews, because we are not sure whether the distancing rule would allow group gathering, but also we are thinking about like when we get research results, when we get some reports, we'll definitely gather up with our participants and talk with them and communicate with them to like verify and also discuss the results we've got to make sure that we are not, misrepresenting anything. Focus group is also like an option we are considering. Of course, I think our research is very direct and could be effective in informing institutional policies, which will be, directly effective for international students, benefits and like their situations in studying in a foreign institution. But also we do understand that there might be some concerns on the participants' parts of, being speaking up against institutions and voicing their grievances. So that's something we should be careful with, and also, try to be nuanced in approaching our participants.
Absolutely, and that'll be part of your qualitative research, right? And your ethics, and assuring your participants that everything will be anonymous. So in your study, will you be looking at all at distance students? So maybe they may or may not be international. For example, I'm a distance student at the University of Calgary, and I can relate to so much of what you're saying, although I'm Canadian, and although the university, says it's equitable and inclusion. For example, my meetings for my classes are at 3 o'clock in the morning. So that is something small, but some of us are not being considered at all as to how the course is run and where we are located. So what about distance students? Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we want to, like Chenzi said, we want to get a nuance. So we are opening our doors to exchange students and students who had to leave. I think the important thing we're trying to look at is the impact. What have come about this? And in order to do that, we need to consider different international students, right? I think the framing of international students is usually one that is someone who's long-term, who has a visa, but our definition of that goes beyond it.
Exactly.
We understand the precarious time and how during this precarious time, the status of what it means to be an international student is
We lost you, Shami. You've turned your microphone off, I think.
Some trolls, perhaps.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes.
My apologies. My apologies. So I think what I said was we want to tease out the nuances, and we want, like what Chenzi said, we understand that international students, the status of what it means to be international students have evolved and changed. So usually the understanding of international students is someone who has a visa and who can stay, long term. However, with the COVID-19 pandemic, what it means to be international students has changed, and we're definitely opening our doors to exchange students, students who are studying from a distance, remote learning. So yes, hopefully these different types of students add a unique challenge and offer also a different insight to policymakers.
Thank you. Well said. Dr. Smith, I know you had a comment about a microaggression study. Did you want to jump in here?
May have left already. Sure.
Dr. Pasek, you talked about communication skills, and I can totally relate because I'm a science graduate and we never paid any attention to communication, to team building several years ago at the University of Windsor. And now I'm in another program and I really see a difference and the emphasis on that, just like you mentioned for your course. I had a question for you. Do you build in the teamwork into your outcomes for your course? Is it part of a learning outcome? And are the students aware that the team building is there intentionally and it's not just for fun, that it's part of what you take out of the course?
Yes, that's definitely intentional because for a number of reasons, but the primary is that today these are students. In 2 years they will graduate and going to look for jobs. Industry is totally working on teams and also distributed teams. So basically they work all around the world. They have to communicate. They have to work in different time zones and reconcile all those issues almost every time. Also, the teamwork is essential because in the project that students have to do in the class, there is so much work that it's impossible to anybody individually do it. And they also have different skills, so they have a chance also to fit into different roles. And that means maybe they can, sometimes teams change leaders along the way, not because they were bad, but because somebody else wanted to try it. So it is element of the design. The difficulty, of course, is that in Canada, semesters are only 12 weeks long. In the US is, another 2 or 3 weeks. To squeeze everything into that short period of time is really, really difficult. And now with these additional barriers that exist, and basically this decoupling this synchronous work that students can do when for teamwork at that level that they are experiencing, they should be in the same space, both time-wise and physically. But that's of course not always possible, especially that the engineering students not only have hours of lectures, but also hours of lab work and tutorials and so forth. So they have to spend a lot of time on campus. So, and then in each class they usually do a team project. So you can imagine that this is a juggling act. They need more limbs.
Yes, Dr. Fujita, did you want to comment on something, perhaps on whether these projects are graded and maybe your opinion on providing contracts for group work, telling the students about assigned roles, about how to deal with missed meetings, and the role that that plays in group work, if it's appropriate in this setting?
Okay. Well, I think Dr. Pasek is the expert on how he structures these activities. But what I did want to mention is that, so Dr. Pasek's been teaching this course with these kinds of engagement activities. They're really hands-on, and then we pivoted online. And a lot of his students in Canada at the University of Windsor are actually international students. Some of the courses, right, Dr. Pasek? So we're dealing with a diverse group of international students. Many of them are from the Middle East. Some of them are from India. So intercultural communication is always a concern. In terms of assessment and providing different roles, I think Dr. Pasek has played with different ways of doing that. So maybe I'll hand it off to you, Dignav.
Yeah, that was the last part of my presentation that we missed, so I could go back to those slides and show you some props for doing this. Because as I said in the beginning, kind of jokingly, that we're all different and all the same. I experienced this myself when at some time back, I was living in a university housing at University of Michigan, and there were, living families nearby who were from Germany, Israel, and Korea, and so forth. And we were coming from different places, but as a group, we were pretty consistent. We had advanced degrees, we had, wives that or husbands who also were professionally engaged, and so in a sense that's kind of a paradoxical. And within this group, communication is usually not an issue. Of course, there may be difference of opinion, but communication is not a barrier. So in a sense, that's what a lot of these students coming from outside are trying to understand, and they develop these skills in the long run. But still, I think the appreciation of other cultures and sort of uncovering what their values are important, because it's not always that everybody lives in harmony. Okay, you unintentionally may trigger something that wasn't planned, and that's going to offend somebody, and or do something else. I mean, there are plenty of different scenarios. So in a sense, providing students with this experience within the classroom is sort of a safe space, to the extent you can call it safe. I mean, because even if mistakes happen in this respect, there is no penalty. I mean, it's expected, right? So they can basically feel their way out and eventually reconcile differences or basically explain the misunderstandings. So that's extremely important.
Yes, of course, to do it within a safe space. How did the students react in their in these activities in their evaluation at the end of the course? Was it something new to them?
There is always a distribution. So, but many times I hear that because I intentionally am trying to put them together in these groups. And this is kind of a blind flying, but so I'm guessing who may not know each other, because students kind of cluster together. Okay, Chinese students hang out together, or Pakistanis or Indians. So they really are not opening themselves up. And Canadians are also another group. So, and they are probably the least interested in these interactions. With the world for whatever reason. But very often I hear back when the class is over that it was first time that they had to work together with somebody from a different culture altogether. So in a sense that this is an enrichment, whether it's successful or not, it's an experience that they may not have had before, because either they were not seeking it, or because there were no opportunity for this to happen.
I'm going to jump in for 1 second. So Dr. Pasek doesn't tell us what the students said. So with the other presenters, we've heard about sort of the more student perspectives of the pandemic experience. So Dr. Pasek is very modest, and he doesn't talk about the very positive feedback he's got from students from his online teaching. So maybe Zbigniew, you want to share some of the nice things people have said having participated on these activities, so people get a sense that so he was afraid they were going to suck, but they did not.
One thing that I was surprised with is that I got a lot of messages after the class was over, after the grades were out and everything, and it seems that students were, at least those who wrote without sort of being pushed to provide any kind of assessment like this, that that somebody took interest in them. Okay, so this is sort of going back to these famous studies where the workers in a factory were improving their output as long as there was interest in them, and the interviewers were sort of looking at what they were doing. Not a physical environment, it's just a human interaction. So we still have time or not?
Yes, we do still have time. Do you have a question for the other presenters?
Could I show these last few slides?
Absolutely, please.
Okay, so maybe we'll be more successful this time.
The slides got really big in size, so I have a PDF version. So let's have you try. And then that doesn't work, like share.
Okay. It will open and hopefully will.
So while he's getting the technology sorted out, I have a question for Shami. And how do you say your name? Is it Feng? Can you? I'm not sure. I'm gonna get the pronunciation wrong. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Chenzi.
Okay. I have a question for you. Is your project a thesis project, or are you doing it as a related project?
We're just doing this as a related project out of a common interest that we have. We've understood that Chenzi is an international student. So her experiences in my dissertation, I'm focusing on international students' experience.
Right.
So through our friendship and our mutual understanding, with the support of our principal investigator, Dr. Goli Rizarashdi, we've come to understand the need for the study and its relevancy, especially right now, because Ontario is one of the only provinces that hosts the largest amount of international students. So where the danger and the severity is at stake. So we've in pursuing this, we're not only causing for social reform, but we're also seeing how the impact, as Chenzi even can speak from firsthand account, the difficulties of being an international student. So yeah.
Thank you. I wish you the best of luck getting some data.
Thank you.
Okay, can I explain now a little bit? So the question is that, or basically the issue is that there is no good resource for addressing cultural issues, especially to technically inclined students. And certainly in the curriculum, there is almost no space for this to be kind of a standalone subject. So I still was trying to do some of this. I found that these playing cards, or actually teaching cards, are quite a useful mechanism that can be used in the classroom. One detriment is that the professional products are quite expensive. So if I have a class of 250 students, I would need to give a deck of cards to each of them that would be, maybe a few $1,000s altogether. But it's possible to basically use the cards as cues for discussion. So some examples you see on the slides. I used a lot of these in the right lower bottom. These are business model related. There is also a Swedish company that issued the cards that are the blue ones on the lower left. and they are called the cultural literacy cards. I haven't used those, but maybe, I'm not sure. It's a little tricky probably. So sometime back I found this deck. It comes from a company, British company that's called the School of Life. And oops, sorry. And unfortunately, it was pretty expensive. And now they don't offer it anymore. And I don't know, maybe it's the cultural climate, or maybe the opportunity to take any missteps culturally wise, that these products are not available anymore. But I took the idea from this, and instead I flipped it around, and instead of using cards, I basically gave students assignments to describe a few cultural artifacts that are important in a culture from which they come from, and also pick one to describe it in more detail. So this is how the assignment looked like. I gave them some examples, and then they were eager to explain a lot of things. So these are just this is just a selection of things, and probably some of you recognize it and you think it's trivial because you have lived with it all your life. But for others, it's a mystery. What's the meaning and what's the significance of any of this in your culture, perhaps. And some of the objects are probably difficult to recognize, like this circular thing in the middle. That's a drum made out of metal that is used in Caribbean music. So, so here is basically a key to these images, where they came from. But it's interesting that it kind of creates a channel for students to talk about themselves. And again, I give them only some guidelines. I don't tell them what exactly to do, so they have a choice. And of course, there are people who are from Canada, and the artifact they like is a hockey puck or Canadian flag, which is kind of a shortcut, I think, out of work. But everybody else is doing something and providing something useful. I have one more slide. I'm not sure if that anecdote that I wanted to tell may fit, but I teach also a statistics class, and a few years back at one of the exams, which was conducted the classical way, that it's closed notes and books exam. One of the problems that I assigned students was related to pizza. If you can think of all the ingredients that you can put on a pizza, then you can figure that you can have a vegetarian one, a mixed one, and maybe with meat or maybe with nothing. And the question was how to calculate how many possible pizza combinations can be had with this list of ingredients. And the list of ingredients included vegetables, and some meats and cheese and other stuff. One of the vegetables was jalapeno. And I got a question from a student who didn't know what that was. And that student was from the Middle East somewhere. So I explained to him, but when I tell this story to other instructors, they feel like that's impossible, right? And if you talk to anybody from South America or Central America, then obviously that's also trivial, right? So that shows how sometimes students do not want to reveal what they don't know today, of course, if they would have a phone with them, they would immediately look it up. But if they are in a corner where there are no phones, no help from everywhere, then only then they will tell us something that they don't actually know. And that may apply to other things as well. So that's the real end of it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. And Dr. Fujita is also typing in the chat about how it feels to lose face by admitting something that you don't understand and know. I think we all feel that way, students or instructors or presenters, right? It's difficult, let alone if you're an international student, as you mentioned in your study as well, Shami and Chenzi.
Yeah, I think, I was international student myself. That was some time back. And of course, the assumption was that with your visa to study, you have certain rights. And these were not the same as of citizens or even permanent residents and so forth. But sometimes at the time when I was a student, there was still kind of the end tail of the Cold War. So when I arrived, and it was on a weekend, so I couldn't report to the university. On Monday, university got a call from FBI where I am because they basically wanted to track everybody who was coming from Eastern Europe and wanted to study manufacturing, right? It's connected to weapons and other stuff. Also, there were a few instances when international students were excluded from some research work because it was for the Department of Defense or other, even though itself it was perhaps benign. I mean, the context was that the money was flowing a certain way, and also I'm sure you're sort of aware in European Union, basically it's borderless. So in a sense, students can travel and study, and they probably are not called international students, even though they are. I mean, they don't need a visa. So in a sense, it's a somewhat strange status, but I know many students who had to return when the pandemic started because this was not their residence. So in a sense, that sort of an undercurrent of these bureaucratic regulations in the unpredictable situation was taken over. And then, of course, universities were closing also. So.
We agree. It's definitely difficult. And you mentioned before, it might be intentional and unintentional. And Shenzi and Shami, you mentioned the gap. I think we're doing a great job in Canada with what we really want to accomplish, with what we're presenting as what we believe. But there's still, practically speaking, it's not happening exactly that way. But we've got good intentions. And I think that's the first step, right?
Yeah.
I think so. I think sometimes, as Chenzi sometimes reminds me that good intentions are often sometimes construed as political performance, and it's sad and it's true and it happens, right? Oftentimes we just throw, or when I say us, I mean political leaders who want to perform. We are inclusive, we are diverse, please come to us. But in reality, we are not, right? And these are only some racialized international students' experience. And I think Dr. Pasek made a really good comment in saying how the EU for some international students is borderless. And it made me think about how some international students can go by without getting harassed because they fit into the image of an ideal international student. And that is, and for those who are visible and are hyper, aware of that they are visible, these students are usually one who encounter these microaggressions. And I hope we tackle some of these, trends and themes in our paper and make a change in higher ed. Chenzi, do you want to add? Yeah.
I was wondering, this in talking about good intentions, I am reminded of this famous feminist text titled "Good Intention is Not Enough," which is, delving into how the complexities in actual interactions between individuals and institutions and individuals and other individuals can be a very political nuance, and like we can see the distinguished play of power in the dynamics. So like sometimes only the privileged people can express their good intentions because it's still like, there's asymmetric power in this relationship. So sometimes I, like as a feminist researcher who want to be focusing on how, individuals and institutions interact, I caution myself not to, to focus too much on intentions and go into the actual interactions and power dynamics beyond intention. And also, like as an international student, sometimes the visa policies regulations make us very aware all the time of our different status as non-citizens. So sometimes, like I talk with my international student friends, and we would share how not being a citizen is not prohibiting us from applying for fundings, getting relief help. And also, working as a PhD candidate here and not looking concerned about our future employment is also giving us the sense of, precarity because, applying for PR is difficult these days. And, as international people, there are always, things that makes us aware. So sometimes intention is a problematic notion. We don't even know whether they want us to be human capital and contribute to economy here, or whether they would rather willing to take care of people out of good intentional humanity. So yeah, it's complex talking about intention.
If I may inject something into this, I think the media play an important role that you're not exploring because they can create this stereotypic representation of people who may look different than local population, and it can be both positive or negative. I can tell you this one instance. In Poland there was a TV series called Ranch. It was about a woman who inherited her grandmother's house and settled in some village in Poland. And somewhere along the way, there was a Chinese or Korean character who appeared in the series who wanted to marry a daughter of one of the farmers in that village. And eventually the story was set up in a way that presented him in a very positive light. So we only found out because my wife, who's teaching Polish and Czech, had a doctoral student in her class who wanted to do some studies in Poland. And he eventually went there and had to stay in some small town or small village too. And people there watched that series. He was their Asian guy. Okay, so basically embraced him, which may put different kinds of strain on you if you're become part of the family. But it was interesting. So I don't know if in tandem, you know, maybe somebody is doing this type of studies that could also explain why the bureaucracy is not informed or ill-informed about certain things.
Well, I think that's a great point. And I do know a few friends who's in comparative literature and cinematic studies who are more focusing on, you know, like a movie and TV studies and also like news media. And I do think that's an important aspect of a social life, which is also a social discourse circulating and which is part of the social institution that is reproducing, you know, stereotypes and biases and discriminations. Certainly, yeah. Because our project is like, it has a limited scope, we wanted to focus on higher education policies and international student experiences, but we do think it's like important to expand the scope and, you know, to examine, interrogate how, you know, those discourses, those media are at play and constitute part of our social conscious. Thank you.
Yes, but this is a social system. In a system, you know, no things sort of exist in separation. So there is a reasons why certain things happen certain way. And that's why it's so complex that you cannot solve this one piece of puzzle and everything else will fall in place. It's only gonna create small ripples.
Yeah, it's so true. Personally, I tried to do this online ethnographic study in the Chinese context around pandemic and how, you know, gender is at play in pandemic. And I feel that, you know, as someone who's in the social sciences, we always feel there is this struggle of, you know, trying to limit your scope, define your field, and also the wish to explore more and to take more complexity into consideration. So that is also one of the things we have to, you know, balance in doing social researches.
So how about Greece? They had
Yes.
a lot of immigrants coming through, right?
Yes, yes. I don't have much experience with that, but something tells me that perhaps we're a little bit more aware of that in Canada, for example. And we had a teacher in here earlier, but I think she is gone now. For example, at the school level, I believe that there's some more mechanisms set up in Canada for English language learners, and I'm not sure if we're at that level yet in Greece, just to give you a small example of at the community level or at the school level.
Yeah, I think Canada has unique policy in this respect because it invites immigrants and that's the main reason why there is a positive population growth, right? But it's also selective, so in a sense, it's there is always it's not for everybody. That's what I should say.
No, and there's always difficulties, like you've pointed out before, and you, Dr. Fujita, we make mistakes as teachers, as learners, intentionally, unintentionally, and we're all growing through this and willing to at least talk about it, research it, read up on it, and move towards a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
A direction that 20 years ago perhaps would not have been thought of. Even the activities that you play, Dr. Pasek, in your department, that would not have been done 20 years ago.
But we didn't have those students then, so you know, it's a response also generates that. So
yes, it all goes together. I think this brings us almost to the end of our presentation. It's been a wonderful chat, great presentations, great feedback and conversation. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you in the next session.
And say thank you for facilitating this presentation eloquently and coherently. And And I'm wishing you all the best in your works and your studies, and hopefully we stay connected, and we'll see each other next year should this symposium continue.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you all.
See you in the next
Bye.
session.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.